Hands up if you have a question.
For tonight's question time, we've come to the West Midlands city of Wolverhampton. It was once a major centre for coal mining, steel production and car manufacturing, and has been home to the mighty Wolverhampton Wanderers FC for nearly 150 years. Our audience members have been busy preparing their points and questions for our politicians, and just like every other week, they're chosen to reflect the range of opinion and recent voting record across the country as a whole. And they want to talk about Trump, Putin, Ukraine, big changes planned on the home front too, including public spending cuts, and potholes. Welcome to Question Time from Wolverhampton. From the government is Treasury Minister Emma Reynolds. Her full title is Economic Secretary to the Treasury, or City Minister. This means she has overall responsibility for the reform and regulation of the country's financial services. From the Conservatives, Luke Evans is a shadow health and social care minister. He's also a qualified doctor and practiced for 7 years before entering Parliament in 2019. As party chief whip, Wendy Chamberlain is the enforcer of discipline among the Liberal Democrats' 72 MPs. She's also deputy leader of her party in Scotland. Before politics, she was a police officer for 12 years. Faiza Shaheen calls herself an inequality geek. She's a distinguished policy fellow at the London School of Economics and has written a book about social mobility. She hit the headlines last year when she was dropped by Labour just before she stood for Parliament in Chingford and Woodford Green. She stood anyway as an independent, narrowly losing to the Conservatives. And Konstantin Kisin grew up in Soviet Russia and moved here aged 11. He's a commentator, writer, co-host of the free speech podcast Trigonometry and identifies as a politically non-binary satirist. Good evening. Welcome to Wolverhampton and welcome to our panel, our audience here. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home, watching from your sitting rooms or wherever you're watching from. And, of course, you can join in the debate on social media as well. That's always pretty lively. Right, let's take our first question, which is from Daniel Baines.
With the Ukrainian President Zelensky praising Donald Trump and a ceasefire now on the horizon, is there a method to Trump's madness?
Is there, Emma?
I think President Trump has certainly introduced a new dynamic in this process, and our
You
Prime
can say
Minister,
that again.
Our Prime Minister has been working very closely with him because we want to see a lasting peace in Ukraine. The Prime Minister a couple of weekends ago brought together European leaders, and this weekend he's bringing forward another coalition of the willing. It's European leaders and other international leaders to ensure that Ukraine gets the support that it needs. The ball is very firmly now in Putin's court, and we need to see how that develops.
And, of course, we've heard Putin say that, you know, he welcomes the idea of a ceasefire, but he's put all sorts of conditions on it, and that's obviously just the beginning.
So we need to see how that develops. But the Prime Minister has been clear that there should be no decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine, and we are steadfast in our support for Ukraine and their people, and we want to see peace on our continent. I mean, it's unthinkable, isn't it? It would have been unthinkable if we were here 4 years ago that we've had war on our continent in Europe. It's pretty frightening.
But Daniel's question is there a method to Trump's madness? And obviously when Donald Trump started saying some of the things he did about Ukraine and looked less of an ally to Ukraine than certainly the previous administration, calling, you know, Zelensky a dictator, you know, calling for elections, all that kind of thing, and Europe threw up its hands in horror at that. We're now talking about peace. We weren't talking about peace before.
No, indeed.
Do you think he's been right all along?
Well, I think there had been attempts to try and establish peace. I think that both President Trump, our Prime Minister, President Macron and other world leaders have shown real determination to try and ensure that we have a path to peace, and that is in everybody's interest. It's in the interest of the Ukrainian people, but it's also in our interest. National security in Europe is our security, and we need to. That's why we've committed to increase defence spending, and that's why the Prime Minister has shown this incredible international leadership in working closely with President Trump and leaders around the world to try and bring forward this peace.
So, Emma, you're talking about, you know, we've always talked about peace. I mean, I've been following this along with all of you, of course, and all of you at home. we were talking about arming Ukraine and hoping that Ukraine would win until Trump came along. I mean, I have to say, on every programme we've done since Trump came to power, there's been huge criticism of Trump, and I'm not forming a judgment one way or the other. But if Daniel's question is there a method to Trump's madness, is he the one that has got us to this point now?
Me? I don't know. Is Donald Trump... For me, I can't work out if he's a visionary, if he's blinkered, or if he's blind, because all three seem to apply. Is it visionary because we're now talking about peace and what we've seen in the Middle East, what we're now seeing potentially in the Ukraine? But is he blinkered because he's putting tariffs on his closest neighbours, or blind because of the disruption he's causing across the world? I don't know is the honest answer, and I think that's the problem, that no one knows. That old adage of saying, you know, his critics take him literally, his followers take him metaphorically, every government's got to take him cautiously, I think really lands true here at the moment, because we just don't know. So the proof is going to be in the pudding.
Daniel, let's hear from you. So what you asked this question. What do you think?
I think the war's been going on for years. We had a previous American president who did nothing about it. Europe's been sleeping. In fact, I think this week they've even been talking about conscription, and people like me may eventually have to go to war.
I mean, just to be clear, Keir Starmer has not talked about it.
Keir Starmer hasn't, but as European, I use him
Poland
collectively,
has, I think.
yeah. And I personally think he's been in charge for 2 months. He's got Zelensky to agree to a ceasefire proposal. I believe his team is in Russia now to potentially get Putin to agree to one. He's done more in 2 months, and he's moving at a rate that's so fast that you guys can't keep up. And I do believe there is a method to his madness. I don't agree with everything he does, but I care about results. And I think everyone in this room wants to see young Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers not dying.
OK. Konstantin.
Well, a few things to say. On my way here, I was watching the press conference that Vladimir Putin was giving in Russian. I think we ought not to get too carried away. Yeah. This is a very early first step. The way Vladimir Putin's responded is just enough, not so that people couldn't blame him for rejecting the ceasefire offer, but nowhere near enough to suggest that real peace is coming in the near future. In terms of Donald Trump, some of the things that he said about Ukraine and Zelensky were absurd, and some of the stuff that's coming out of the MAGA right in America pretty disgusting about Ukraine. However, we have to acknowledge the reality. The reality is we promised the Ukrainians that we would help them win. We didn't actually give them the help that was sufficient for them to win. And when Donald Trump came along, he's found a conflict that was essentially a meat grinder in which both Russian and Ukrainian soldiers were dying for no significant gain, really, for either side. He's, I think, extremely genuine in attempting to bring this to a close. And he's making steps that no one else has. So I think there's absolutely a method to the madness. And I think it's described in his book, actually, where you throw out crazy things that discombobulate everyone, and then you come in and actually solve the problem. So I'm delighted that steps are being made towards peace, but we're a long way away from that outcome.
OK. Man in the blue stripy top.
Obviously, since Trump came into power, we've had a lot of talk about what a resolution for the war looks like and whether or not it will come along. But what actually would make up a peace agreement in this war? Would it be a cessation of violence? Would it be NATO membership? Territory gains, that sort of thing? Because obviously Russia occupies territory at this moment. What would that kind of look like? Do we have any sort of idea?
Let me come back to that. The woman there in the black top.
I would not give Donald Trump any credit for where we are right now. The way he has gone about it, he's act like a bully. He's an overgrown man acting like a bully. He's instruct stuff from the Ukrainian president, which is unacceptable. Yes, we need to talk and have peace, but I would not give him credit for the way he has gone about and done it.
OK. The man at the very back. Man at the very back. That's it, yeah.
I just can't understand why Trump's spouting peace without ever appearing to have spoken to the Russians, unless he's done some backdoor negotiations. Because for him to do a deal and then say to Russia, this is our deal, accept it or don't, seems ridiculous.
Faiza?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few weeks ago, though I'm not a fan of Trump, I would have said, like, at least there's these discussions happening. But I do think he's really strengthened Russia's hands in the last few weeks. But we saw it with the fallout when he had that argument with Zelensky in front of all the cameras at the Oval Office. We see it with him, pausing arms deliveries. And now I'm really worried for the Ukrainians because I think they're going to get sold out. And I think that they will lose territory. I think that in negotiations, the Russians will drive a really hard bargain. And Trump has done some things,
you know, he didn't intentionally, but I think he's brought Europe together. I think he's made us look at our security. You know, I'm not someone that wants to see defence spending necessarily go up because, you know, the idea of raising my son in a world where there's an arms race really worries me. And so what I would really love to see the government thinking more about is a longer-term peace plan and thinking about our security, like energy security and food security. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it really highlighted a lot of problems that we have. Right? Our bills went up massively. And had we had less reliance on importing gas and energy, then we would have been in a much better place. So I think there's a broader, longer-term strategy that we need to make sure we have peace, because none of us want to live in that world where we're just upping and upping defence spending.
Wendy?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why does Trump, for me, want to achieve peace? For me, it's so that Donald Trump can take credit for achieving that peace. And where I would agree with Faiza is the fact that clearly he has got Ukraine to a position where they've agreed in the first instance of this 30 days ceasefire.
And do you think he doesn't deserve credit for getting us to
Well,
this
he's
point?
done it by materially weakening what should be an ally to the US, and indeed making life very difficult for his allies, both here in Europe and also, as we see in Canada and Mexico, with the relationship fracturing that's been going on. So I think that is certainly how I feel about it. In relation to that 30-day ceasefire, I'd absolutely agree with Konstantin, and I think we're at very early days. There's absolutely no doubt that Putin now has a decision to make. But the reality is that Putin sees Ukraine as part of Russia. And for him, any kind of step back from that is going to weaken his position in Russia. And I think that makes things quite difficult to see how there's a way forward.
The man in front in the black sweater.
Trying to echo something that the gentleman said behind in the last part of his reply. I served in the army as well as other forces, and a year of my service was in West Germany. The threat of where Konstantin was from was imminent and the most scariest thing I've ever lived through. So actually living through the threat of during an arms race and everything like that is the scariest thing I've ever done, and I've done a few things in my life. The problem is peace can't come at any cost. You have to show strength to stop them coming over the border. And that's what NATO did while I served in West Germany.
Yeah.
We may not have had much of a lifespan if they'd have come over the border, and that's what we were told every single day, and from the other threats, but that must be shown strength.
And obviously, you know, you over there and you're in the blue stripe top, you talked about what would peace look like. I mean, Putin is saying, at the moment anyway, the idea of having NATO troops and even European troops in Ukraine is a non-starter.
Yeah. Well, yes, so let me address that. I really want to, because I think it's the most important part of this entire discussion. Can I just say on the credit, if Donald Trump can do a good deal for Ukraine, let's build him a golden statue of him the size of the Statue of Liberty and put it wherever he wants and give him all the credit and bow down and whatever. I don't care who gets the credit or not. If he can do the right peace deal, I think that will be worth it, honestly. Now, what is the right peace deal? I don't know if you remember, Fiona, the first time I was on this programme was a few days after the invasion. And I said at the time, territory is not that important. What matters for Ukraine is long-term security. Yes. And that does mean British, French, European peacekeepers on that border. NATO membership, I think, is out of the question at this point. But there has to be a physical barrier between Ukraine and Russia. Otherwise, this will happen again, and we're going to be sitting here talking about yet another invasion and another risk of nuclear escalation. And by the way, here's another thing. If we as the West sell out Ukraine, you know what's going to happen? Every other country that has powerful enemies like Russia is going to say, well, you guys are not going to protect me. That means we need nuclear weapons, because that's the only way to keep ourselves safe. So if we want to stop the world from becoming more polluted with nuclear weapons, we have to make sure that Ukraine gets a good deal. And if Donald Trump can do that, give him a Nobel Peace Prize.
Which he said he wants, actually, I think. Yeah.
Really?
The man, I think he has. The man there in the glasses in the suit, yes.
Negotiations tend to start, particularly at this scale, to start like a pendulum swing, being very, very polarised. And as they progress, it sort of gets closer to where that pendulum's going to stop. And we don't know where that's going to stop or how long it's going to be. But within that, there's an element of predictability. The unpredictable element is Donald Trump and who presents a wild card in this situation.
And is that his... I mean, just coming back to Dan's original question, is that his strength, do you think, or is that his weakness?
It can...
It can be either. I think it
The
can be
jury's
either.
out, isn't it?
Yeah.
OK. Man at the very back, you've got a grey top on, I think, with glasses. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think Trump is taking all the headlines here with his bull in a china shop methods. But I'm not a traditional Labour supporter, but I've got to say that I think our own PM, Sakir, has played a good hand in this, and I think he's been working in the background with the Europeans, with the Ukrainians, with the Americans, and I think our own PM has done a good job here.
I would agree.
You'll be clear. What a surprise. Man in the... You've got a white top on, I think. Yeah.
Trump was accusing Zelensky of potentially causing World War III. To be honest, I'm more concerned that he might cause World War III. God knows what's discussed behind closed doors with Russia. So for me, I think it's probably scary times.
Let's not forget, though, Russia started this illegal war. It's an illegal invasion by Russia of a sovereign state. I met with one of the Ukrainian ministers yesterday. The Vice Minister for Economy came to see me in the Treasury. And just to talk about something that Faiza said a couple of minutes ago, it's really important that we're not just showing international leadership in terms of bringing the sides together. We're also talking to the Ukrainians about how we can help them once we have a lasting peace in their reconstruction. So we've already enabled some of the frozen Russian assets to underpin loans to Ukraine. So I agree, we don't know how this is going to develop, and it's relatively early days. But once we get that lasting peace, then we need to be in a position, a strong position, to help them rebuild their country.
And in terms of releasing money from the frozen Russian assets, which is something Donald Trump has talked about at some length, said, why aren't you doing it? And there are various legal and diplomatic reasons why that's not happened so far. Do you think there's a chance that is going to happen, though?
Well, let's be clear about this. We're using immobilised Russian assets to underpin loans to Russia, and we are also using the interest that we are gaining from that to help.
But in terms of the actual assets themselves, the cash or the yachts or whatever they might be, is there a chance realistically that those are going to get used?
Well, legally it's very difficult to do, and also you want to be very careful what kind of precedents you set.
Chelsea Football Club, Abramovich, here's money?
That is a very tricky issue, but the agreement with him was that that money should go into a foundation, and that foundation should support Ukraine, but we're yet
Oh, well, job done then, isn't it?
Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it? But we're yet to get to that point, obviously.
OK, look, we will come back to this subject many times, I'm sure. So I'm just going to move on and take another question. Before I do, I'll just tell you where we are next week, which is Reading in Berkshire. And the week after that, we're in Dartford in Kent. So if you'd like to come and be part of our programme and put your questions, as our audience here is in Wolverhampton, Reading or Dartford, go to the Question Time website. The instructions will be there to tell you how to apply, and hopefully I will see you there. So Reading next week, that's the first one. OK, Claire Heath, where are you sitting? Right, let's hear your question.
Will the abolition of NHS England ultimately improve the performance of our NHS?
Right, so Keir Starmer announced today, didn't he, that NHS England, which is the body that runs the health service, a sort of administrative, managerial part of the health service, will be abolished to cut bureaucracy, that's the way he's describing it, and bring management of the NHS back into democratic control, so make it part of the Department of Health. Luke, as a former GP, you were GP for what, 7 years or something?
So I qualified as a doctor in 2007.
Right.
And then, yes, 2013 was a GP.
So NHS England was brought about. And it's worth saying that in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, this kind of thing, it doesn't exist, but it was brought about as a result of Conservative reforms under the then Health Secretary, Andrew Lansley, to kind of keep NHS management at arm's length from politicians. And the Labour government's now said, right, let's bring it back into the purview of politicians. What's your view? I mean, as a GP, will it improve the performance of the NHS? Will it make any difference?
But I don't know at this point, and I think it's the honest answer. No one knows. One of the things people always say to me is, why is the NHS always such a political football? And that was one of the reasons to say, give it to NHS England, because then you keep it out of politicians' control. There's always going to be an issue over what budgets you put in place. Now we're taking it back. The good news about that is you hold Wes Streeting directly accountable for everything that goes on in there. The downside is, how much influence is that politician going to have? Whoever's in power is going to make those decisions.
But did you get the sense as a GP that NHS England was a deadening hand upon the functioning of the NHS?
Ooh, a deadening hand. I'm going to turn it around in a different way. We've got a CDC being built in my area in Hinckley, which is a community diagnostic centre. £24 million investment. And so when this was being lined up, I asked, can I meet the management to find out, you know, how this works? And 6 people came on the screen, and we did the conversation about what's going on. I said, if there's a problem, who do I speak to? Who's in charge? And they said, well, we are. I said, sorry, who do I need to call as the MP if there's a problem? And they said, well, we are. And that was the problem. So I've seen that when I volunteered as a doctor in the vaccination side, fully signed off, working as a GP, and I volunteered, and I had to see 4 different people to be signed off in the pandemic. These are the kind of things that you need to get out. Now, whether it's a politician that's going to make the decision or NHS England, I really don't know. What I'd like to see is more of the clinicians being able to make the decisions because they understand that role far better. And if we can push things down, that's the idea behind the ICB format. This is the integrated care boards and allowing them to come together. We started to see that happen in 2022. The problem is now we're seeing where does it actually go when the pressure's on and we've got different budgets from social care and mental health. So I don't know is the honest answer.
I presume you do know.
Yes, of course. So, look, the whole point of this is that we, at the moment, have 2 national organisations, the Department of Health and NHS England, essentially doing a very similar job. And there's just too much duplication. And the Tories invented this in England, don't have in Scotland or Wales, about 13 years ago. And we've seen this huge duplication of costs and therefore money going to back office, whereas what we want to do is make sure that more of that investment is in the front line, so we've got more resources for treating patients. Well, it's going to save quite a lot of money, actually.
How much?
Well, I'll come to that in a minute. Because at the moment, we have 2 comms teams.
500 million, isn't it?
This is the ludicrous situation we have. We have a comms team in NHS England and a comms team in the Department for Health and Social Care. We have a policy team in both organisations. We have a strategy team in both organisations. We do not need that number of people doing those sort of admin jobs. Between 2010 and now, we've got double the amount of people working across those 2 organisations, yet patient satisfaction levels are at some of their lowest on record. When we left government in 2010, they were at their highest levels. So we've got more people working in admin, but patient outcomes are worse. So what we want to do is build on the progress we're already making. We've had waiting lists coming down now for the 5th month in a row. This is, this is great progress. We've still got a long way to go, but we've got to do something urgent and profound in order to get NHS reform and NHS investment into actual patient care, improving the lives of people who are being treated by the NHS. That's what this is all about.
And one result of this will be that something like 9,000 people are going to lose their job. As a Labour government, are you happy with that?
Well, there will be job losses.
I mean, it's going to be, 50% is what's being quoted by the government, which is if you include NHS England and the few in the Department of Health, that's about 9,000 people. That's a hell of a lot of people you're putting out of work.
But what's important here...
But are you bothered about that?
Well, obviously those are difficult decisions, but what's really important here is that too many people have been waiting for too long for standard operations on the NHS, thanks to the mess we inherited from the Conservative government. And we've got to make sure that we double down on the progress we're already making in bringing down those waiting times and improving that patient care.
All right. Man in the red top.
Of those 50% or 9,000 people, will those actually come from frontline or just be from backroom staff? And also,
when you say frontline, they aren't going to be people who are working as nurses or doctors. That's not the kind of people.
Yeah, are we going to encourage people to go into those jobs as well, though, still, and try and get more people frontline to get rid of those waiting lists?
OK, there's a man there with the glasses on.
Well, the problem is you have some clinicians who are doing both of these roles.
Sure, but in NHS England, it's primarily admin and managerial.
You'll be a portfolio doctor doing some of these roles. So part of the whole point is to have some crossover structure. So the worry is actually, with those job losses, is where is that talent going? Where is that experience going that's going to try and help solve the problem? That's a really important
We need to get those people back on the front line, don't we?
Hang on a minute. Hang on, just so I'm clear. In NHS England, of the 9,000 jobs, the vast majority is not going to be people you're going to put back on the front
No, of
line. They're
course
going to be
not.
going on the line to the unemployment office, surely.
So the point that Luke raises, if there are clinicians who are double-hatting, we want to make sure that we are putting more of the investment. We put a record amount of investment into the NHS in the budget, over £22 billion. We've got to make sure that those resources are focused on improving patient care.
But who's going to design the system? It's the doctors and the clinicians.
We'll
they
still
understand
have people
the system.
designing the system. We just don't
But
need
you've just
two
taken them
sets
out
of
'cause you
people
wanted
designing
them,
the system.
But they're the people, the professionals who straddle across in clinical leadership, often have two hats to be able to see what goes on in day-to-day world and then try and make things better in the system. If you take those out, where do they go? What happens? You're suddenly saying the politician knows best over the NHS, and that's a risk.
So you started out by saying you didn't know if it'd make a difference, but it sounds like you do think
No,
it makes a difference now. Just to be clear.
There's a risk. We don't know what's happening with these people.
Let's see what our audience think, who obviously, I'm sure all of us have received NHS treatment at some point. Yes, man in the glasses there.
You've made the point that neither Scotland nor Wales has the equivalent of NHS England, and yet their health services don't appear to be in any better shape.
In fact,
so
worse.
what tangible results and evidence are we going to get from this?
OK. Man there in the black jacket. Yes, sir.
My concern is, having cared for my wife now going on 20 years, is the potentiality of too many managers at the top. Clearly, something needs to happen. It's parallel with what Sir Keir Starmer's talking about in terms of the civil service, and he's already looking at how that can potentially bring about redundancies. My concern is that waiting lists are still increasing just for one issue at the moment, which I can't talk about. I've been told it's going to take 15 weeks just to get your first appointment. So clearly something is still going wrong. And I just feel there's far too many managers and not enough clinicians actually making the decisions.
Well, so this might be a good thing then, as far as you're concerned.
Sorry?
This might be a good thing then, as far as you're concerned, getting rid of NHS.
I think that if there's two departments and it gives me tail-end ideas of the tax office that do everything in triplicate, then we need to look at it.
Let's hear from the woman behind you.
Hello. You've mentioned that there are clinicians that are double-hatting currently in the NHS England, and you were worried about politicians saying they know best. Well, could we not have a politician in charge of our health systems who have a background as a clinician in the first place? So they've been a doctor or a nurse and they've gone through the system and then they've gone, you know what, I want to go into politics. And then, so we have someone in charge of our health system who actually knows how it works in the beginning.
OK, well,
I like this woman.
Yes, I'll come round the rest of the panel. Let me just say, the woman at the very back with the glasses on. Yeah. Yes.
Should you not... the nature of politics is the government changes every 5 or so years. Should the NHS not be looked after by the government or politicians cross-party, so there can be a long-term goal that's being achieved than swapping and changing?
Wendy?
Yeah, to the gentleman that pointed out in terms of the NHS, certainly in Scotland, you mentioned 15 weeks. I've got a constituent that's waiting in excess of 100 weeks for an appointment in relation to cardiology. So, you know, the system in Scotland is not working as it should be either. And obviously we've had a government in Scotland who've been in charge of the NHS for the last 17 years. And I certainly hope to see change in May next year when the Scottish Parliament elections happen. But in relation to NHS England, you know, from my party's perspective, we broadly welcome what the government is proposing to do, but I think we always have to be really careful when we're talking about this top-down reorganisation and also talking about saving a lot of money. Frankly, I think people are quite cynical about politicians talking about how much money things will save and then at the same time cutting winter fuel allowance, etc., because there's a £22 billion black hole to fill. But the big issue for me, and I think a big issue for my party, and it's true for me in Scotland as well, is about social care. And our view is if you do not fix social care, you commented on looking after your wife, and thank you for doing that, because unpaid carers save the NHS billions and billions of pounds. But if we don't actually solve social care as an issue, we aren't actually going to get the issues with the ambulances waiting outside A&Es, the bed blocking that we're experiencing. Those are the kind of issues we need to challenge. And we are looking at that on a cross-party basis. The Liberal Democrats were very clear at the election that we would speak to any party that wanted to look at social care, and we've got the Social Care Commission coming forward. I really want to see parties meeting so that we're actually tackling that issue, so that come the next election, you all see those results.
Faiza, the question is, will the abolition of NHS England improve the performance of the NHS?
That's the key question, right? Is it actually going to make life easier? Is it going to make it easier for us to use the NHS and get a good service? And I think, again, there isn't actually... I was looking when this was announced. I couldn't find the evidence. I looked at places like King's Fund, which is a think tank that specialises on this. And, you know, actually... You know, this is good sound bites, like let's make states smaller. It's sort of what Elon Musk is doing with Doji in the US. It's saying, OK, we're going to get rid of all these civil servants. And some of that, there may be some inefficiencies in there, but we've just been through 14 years of austerity when a lot of cuts were made. I don't see that there's a lot of fat left in the civil service. And we do need people that do the planning. I'm not saying it has to be massive, but you do need people that do that. And also, at this time, when there's so much to fix in the NHS, because you're absolutely right, the Tories left it in a complete disaster, do we need this kind of distraction? Like, any of us that have been through restructure before, we know it's like a massive headache. So do we need this right now? Is it going to deliver? And also, this is really important. This puts it in the hands of Wes Streeting. Now, the Good Law Project did some work around where funding is coming from and where donations are coming from. And 60% of his donations since 2015 have come from either companies or individuals linked to private healthcare. What we're seeing right now in terms of waiting lists is a two-track system. So if you've got a simple thing to do, it's going to the private sector. We as taxpayers are paying the private sector. OK, good, because the waiting lists are going down a bit quicker. If you've got something more complicated, it's staying in the NHS, which is more difficult.
But are you saying by mentioning the funding...
Are
you saying by mentioning the funding that Wes Streeting has, I don't know if that's right or not, are you saying that he's basically being bought by private interests and that's affecting his decision?
Listen, what I'm saying
is that not the implication of what you're saying?
Well, that is the implication of that work that the Good Law Project has done. What I'm saying is that we have to be careful when we put this directly in the hands of politicians. We should look at where they get their donations from. Of course we should. We should look at why it is that our private sector contracts in the NHS are now being made for longer periods of time. And we should worry about this, because in the short term, you might think, OK, their waiting list going down. In the longer term, as we've learned in Thames Water, as we've learned in different privatisation like trains, it ends up costing us more. So this is my general concern about this, is that we need to make sure we still have accountability.
OK, just very quickly. I mean, Faiza's basically saying Wes Streeting is effectively being bought off. I think that's kind of what you're implying there.
Well, I'm sorry, but you look into the numbers. You have to look behind every politician. Of course you do.
I'm sorry, but that is totally ludicrous. We've made more progress in 7 months in bringing down waiting times than the last government did in 14 years. Well, yes, OK, we've used spare capacity in the private sector. What's wrong with that if people are actually getting the treatment that they need? I'm very pragmatic about this. I absolutely believe profoundly in our NHS. But if we need to use spare capacity in the private sector, I'm very happy to do that. Waiting lists are coming down and are coming down for their 5th month running. And Wes Streeting and the Prime Minister and the whole government are absolutely determined to invest in our NHS, and that's why we put record levels of funding in. You talk about austerity. This is not austerity. £22.6 billion into the NHS is not austerity, but we need reform at the same time.
The question is about the abolition of NHS England. That's the big announcement today. Is it going to make any kind of difference at all?
Well, we'll find out. I think the gentleman who cares for his wife, I think, made exactly the right point, which is we've got a massively bloated, unaffordable public sector that is completely unsustainable. Not only that, it has way more power than it should. I've sat on my show interviewing politician after politician who details in excruciating levels of detail the way that our politicians are hampered by, prevented from doing the things we elect them to do by people who are bureaucrats. I've said only half-jokingly that the reason I believe in an independent nuclear deterrent is that if this carries on, we can use it on Whitehall. And my point is that, you know, you're making me do something that's very natural for me, Fiona, which is defend the Labour government. But when you talk about 9,000 job losses, we don't want to employ as taxpayers 9,000 people who are doing something we don't need them to do. We need to find those people jobs that are actually going to be productive for our economy. And if what they're doing now is preventing things from being done properly and costing a lot of money to the taxpayer, we should be getting rid of them and finding other employment for them. So we are going to have to... Guys, you've got to remember, our debt is 100% of our GDP. We talk about austerity. During that time, our debt went up. We cannot afford to carry on the way that we're going, and we're going to have to make cuts.
Let me take a couple more points. Yes, the man there in the grey sweater.
Our daughter used to work at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Birmingham, in the urology department. When we when we took her on holiday, she had to train her manager how to do her job, because she didn't have an idea. This is what they're talking about. Two lots of people doing one job when one person should be able to do the job and not have the worker teach her just so that she could go on a holiday.
I hear you. I'm not sure that people working at NHS England would be that manager, but I hear what you're saying. Yes, there's a woman over here, and I can't quite see you. You've got an orange top on. Yes.
I feel that we have a lot of specialists who do not manage to do their job because they teach one day, they go to another hospital another day, and then they go to their private practice, etc., etc. And so a lot of people get lost. They fall through the floorboards, nobody deals with them. And so if you're getting rid of all of these people on NHS England, well, obviously you need to be getting some of those people to actually look at how can they make the system better? How can it be better administered?
Well, that's what they're supposed to be doing now, but
Yeah, well,
they're being
not.
got rid of.
They're not.
OK. NHS is a subject we come back to pretty much week after week as well. So I'm going to park it there for now. Let's hear from Karen. Karen MacDonald. Where are you sitting? Ah, right at the back, yeah.
If the proposed benefit cuts are supposed to get people back to work, how do you genuinely ensure that genuinely unwell people are not going to be impoverished?
So we understand that there is going to be a green paper from the Work and Pension Secretary, possibly next week. And there's been lots of reports about cuts to the welfare budget, possibly of as much as £5 to £6 billion. It's certainly what the BBC has been reporting. And Keir Starmer has talked on more than one occasion about how, you know, there is a moral duty where people can work, they should work. Can I just ask you, Karen, you've asked this question, is this something you're worried about?
It's not something that I'm particularly worried about personally, but I know that there are so many people who will suffer because they aren't going to be able to get the benefits that they need to be able to do, to be able to survive if they're forced to, if they're not allowed to claim the benefits that they need.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Faiza, the incapacity and disability benefits cost last year almost £65 billion, which is more than 3 government departments put together. Do you agree that there should be cuts to the welfare bill?
I don't agree. I don't agree with directly cutting people's money. And, you know, it's really striking, isn't it, the last few weeks? There's always money for war, but not for the poor. And here we are. OK, there's people, disability benefits. My own mum, I saw her go through this and the cuts under the Tories. Right? She had heart failure. Did she want heart failure? Absolutely not. She was in her mid-50s. They came, they harassed her. You know, it was absolutely heartbreaking to see. And anyone that knows someone that's been through that, you'll know the lack of dignity. And underlying this, and I'm so upset and shocked to see this come from a Labour government, is an idea that somehow people that are struggling, people that are on benefits are all cheating. That's just not the case. That's just not the case. That's the implication for always going for this group of people. And honestly, there is so many better ideas on which to raise money, more money. The richest in this country, the ultra-rich, have got so much richer in recent years, even during COVID, actually, especially during COVID. And if we just took just a small percentage of those with over 10 million in wealth, which is something most of us couldn't imagine, and put a 2% tax on that, that could raise £24 billion a year.
Faiza, let me ask you that. Faiza, you're an economist, so obviously you are well versed in this, so you will know better than I do that there are many countries that have introduced wealth taxes and that have abandoned them because either they haven't worked or because they have brought in so little money. So what makes you think that the United Kingdom can do something that so many other countries have failed to do when it comes to raising revenue?
But we always focus on the failures. There's also countries that have done well with their wealth taxes and countries that are introducing them right now, so Spain,
usually
Norway.
as a one-off tax for 1 year only.
It's a really good question. So I worked with governments around the world, actually, that were looking at this. And one thing they did was that they were very clear about what the money was going to be used for. They spoke about it in terms of solidarity. And so the public was really behind it. And so the rich knew that there wasn't really much they could do to argue against it. We're at a time when we want to increase defence spending, when we want to improve services, when we're dealing with the climate crisis. This is a really key moment to say, do you know what? The riches have got so much richer in this country. You can put in a bit more at this point because there's so much we need to sort out in this country. There's so much we need to do to make sure the next generation has a better life. I'm genuinely really worried for my 1-year-old's future. You say this about people moving abroad. Some of my colleagues at London School of Economics went and spoke to rich people. And do you know what they said? They said, oh, yeah, I do say that, but I actually did move to Geneva for a while and I came back because I love the opera in London and my kids are at this private school and what have you. You know, it's not just money. There's other things that are involved as well. So we might lose a couple of rich people, but in general, actually, people do stick around.
So that couple of rich people, the study shows 11,000 people, because of the Labour non-dom budget, 11,000 millionaires have left. That's the equivalent of 500,000 average taxpayers. And you have to remember that the top 1% pay 1/3 of the income tax. So if these people do leave, and they can leave because the world is a small place to them, that is repercussions, which is why we saw Rachel Reeves at Davos say she's going to make changes to her non-dom policy. Now, there's an argument over why she listens to them, not farmers and anyone else. But fundamentally, we want people to be wealthy, to bring more wealth in, to be able to fund the NHS side of things.
I really want to come back on this.
The only other country that's lost more millionaires in the world is China. And so we're seeing that happen right before our eyes because of the consequences of the Labour budget.
Why should we reward bad behaviour? Non-doms are not paying those tax as they should. And so you're saying because some of them are thinking about leaving, and be careful about this because rich people often say they're going to leave and then they don't.
They have left. They've left.
Well, they're paying their tax somewhere else before the new rules.
Well, then they might as well have left.
That's different, right? And so this is a future-forward policy, and others could make the argument for why this needs to change. But what I want to go back to is that there is a choice. You have to make political choices. So can we leave disabled people alone and look to the richest and say, do more, right? That's a political choice.
All right. Konstantin, what do you think?
Well, there's much sense in what you're saying on other things. And look, obviously the story with your mother is something that's familiar to other people, and it's shocking. The reality of this is that there are basically 3 buckets of people that the sickness, long-term sickness, deals with. You've got people like your mother, you just need the help, they're not going to be able to work. And that's what it is. And they need all the help that we can give them. There's the other group of people who are effectively in a position where they've had some kind of temporary setback in their life. They may not feel well enough to work just now. And what happens to way too many of those people is they get trapped in the system. And one of the reasons is that there are situations for many, many people where it makes no sense for you to go back to work because you're going to actually have less money at the end of it. So we've got to end that because we're leaving millions of people at this point on the scrap heap and doing that. Then also there is a much smaller group of people who are just taking advantage of the system, and we've got to get better at filtering them out as well. So yes, it's very important. We're very clear about who belongs in which bucket, but we cannot leave millions of, including many, many hundreds of thousands of very young people on the scrap heap with no chance to get back into work. And very often it's not because they can't, it's because we don't give them the help they need, because it's easier. Take your money and shut up. That's what we do with them. Instead of giving them CBT, all sorts of job skills, training, etc. That's where we should be putting the money.
That costs more money, though, so that wouldn't lower the budget.
I'm not saying we should lower the budget necessarily. What we should be doing is getting people back into work, because when people are working, they pay taxes, and then we make more money. And that's what we really should be focusing on.
Yes, man here.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with the lady that put the question to the panel. People with disabilities, like myself, when we get a letter come through the post to say that you're going to have a reassessment and so on,
anxiety.
the amount of anxiety
and
and
fear.
worry that causes, you know, makes your disability a bit more severe. And I know people.
How often do you get a letter like that?
Well, it can vary. You can have a review, you can have a reassessment, you can just have a phone call assessment, which I'm a big critic of. Because if you're going to have an assessment, it's good to see the individual and exactly the disability that they have, plus with the medical evidence. So I think the assessments on a practical level are very, very poorly done, because sometimes you're talking to someone on the phone, you can't hear them very well. The questions are sort of, you know, they can be a bit tricky.
So when you hear the government say the welfare bill is kind of
Well,
ballooning out of control and needs to
suggestion.
come down, do you have any sympathy with that at all?
I've got a suggestion, if I can put to
Of
the
course.
panel. Yeah, I read some time ago in one of the major papers that the V&A Museum has millions of treasures in their vaults which will never see the light of day. Yeah, the amount of exhibitions and treasures that are put on show is only 2-3% of the amount of treasures that Great Britain has. Those treasures are never going to come out the vaults. Get them out, sell them, make the money, and put that money into, you know, these...
the welfare bill.
The welfare bill.
Now, I have to say, that is not a suggestion I have ever heard before.
We've got a Treasury Minister here.
Question time. Ever.
Over to the Treasury Minister.
It's not an idea I've heard before either, but I think... Look,
would you support it? The man would like to know.
Not sure. Look, I think we can all agree that the current system is failing lots of people. It's failing young people. 1 in 8 people not in employment, education or training. That's not good enough. That nearly 1 million young people in that situation. Nearly 3 million people out of work due to ill health. We're the only major economy in the world whose activity rate, employment rate, still hasn't recovered from the pandemic. We've got a big problem here. And this is about employing the values that I hold dear in the Labour Party of equality and justice, and also dignity in work. This is about helping people.
So how do you convince Pfizer then? Because Pfizer's not buying that.
Well, no, I know she isn't, but I don't think we'll agree on this. But, I mean, look, this is about ensuring that the system stops failing people who are suffering from ill health, stops failing young people, crucially, stops failing employers, and, frankly, stops failing the taxpayer, because we have this binary system. Either you're well enough to work or you're not. But lots of people need that additional support to get back into work. And
But
that's what we're talking about.
The things that Konstantin is talking about in terms of, you know, help getting back into work, you know, CBT is one thing you mentioned, but all sorts of other strategies to get people back into work, which is Pfizer also mentioned.
Yeah,
So
we're already
that's not
doing
what,
that.
Yeah, but
We're already doing
work
it. We've
coaches, I know top coaches. But helping all these people back into work, that's not going to be cheap. Is that actually going to save money at the end of the day? Because the idea of this is cost-cutting.
Well, it should save money, yes, because our social security bill is very, very high. And if we leave it as it is, it will hit about £70 billion by the end of this decade. That is too high. So we need to make sure that we are giving people the support they need to get back into work. Our employment rates are too low. We need to get young people into the workforce. We need to help people. We've already launched 8 pilots, helping young people back into work and also trying to integrate NHS care and the help that you get through DWP.
Because I'm old enough to have worked on the programmes and to looked at the programmes that happened under New Labour last time round, which were actually a lot of money went into this New Deal for workers. But what they found, and the evidence was very clear, that it needs a lot of support, expensive support, tailored support. And when it does work, when more people go back into work, it's because there's more jobs available to people. And there's a contradiction here in Labour policy when you're putting a tax on employers and national insurance, making it harder for them to employ people. That's what the evidence showed for the Labour programmes the last time round. Let's look at the evidence.
Well, we think that it is absolutely critical that we get a lot of these people back into work. Those who can
Have you
work
looked at those last
should work.
programmes, incidentally?
Oh, well, that was a long time. Look, we've come a long way since then.
OK, all right.
And
I'll take that as a no. Wendy?
I think the challenge for me, and it goes back to what Konstantin said, is when we talk about the welfare budget, I think I can agree with some of the things that Emma is saying, given that we know that the welfare budget costs an extra £70 billion a year since 2019-2020. So it has gone up by a huge amount under the last Conservative government. But what really distresses me is when we start talking about it and the first thing that comes out is personal independence payments. Personal independence payments are for people with disabilities who may be able to work or may not. Actually, whether they can work or not is not part of the equation in terms of personal independence payments, because all that happens when we talk about this is we cause the anxiety and distress for disabled people that the gentleman here described. It is absolutely clear that we need to be doing more to help people back into work, particularly our young people. And that actually links us back to the last question, doesn't it, in terms of getting our NHS working, particularly in relation to issues such as mental health. If we don't get the NHS working, we're not going to be able to give people the support they need to get back into work. But the final point is the one that Faiza made for me, is that actually, in terms of the economy, we need the economy to be growing. And the Labour government says that that is their priority.
It is.
Well, I'm really sorry, Emma, but a lot of the things that you're doing are not going to help with that. If we look at the national insurance contribution increases that employers are facing, just last week in Parliament, Liberal Democrat peers brought forward an amendment to that bill that ensures that social care and health providers will not have to pay those increases. That's going to come back to the Commons next week, and I'm pretty sure that the Labour government are going to vote it down again. So we're not going to actually support healthcare to help people back into work. And if the economy isn't growing, there's not the jobs for people to go into.
I just want to end that there because I've got about 7 minutes to fit in a last question. Now, when we get to this, I don't want you thinking of all the big troubles that are going on in the world. Why on earth are you talking about this? The reason we're going for this next question is because every week, quite a few people ask it, and we keep thinking, oh, we're not going to discuss that on Question Time. The moment has come. So, Minesh, where are you? Minesh Patel. Why can't I see? Oh, you're right there. Yeah, off you go.
So, there are potholes everywhere. Why are our roads in such a state of disrepair?
Potholes. That comes up week after week after week after week. Yeah. Right, Emma.
I'm not surprised that you raise this, because day after day, week after week, whenever we go door knocking, we talk to people and we say, what are the big issues? What are the things you really care about? What are the things you're really hacked off about? They often say potholes.
Yes, because there's loads of them. OK, so according to the RAC, hang on, according to the RAC, they're an average, because we had to do a bit of a brief on this, they're an average of, I can't pretend I knew this before tonight, there are an average of 6 potholes per mile on council-controlled roads in England and Wales.
Well, look, that is shocking, and it doesn't surprise me, and it affects all of us, doesn't it? It affects us because it ruins our cars, and it affects tradespeople because it's even more of an issue for them if then they can't work as a result.
Sure. Well, we know how it affects us, which is why people ask the question all the time. What are you doing about it?
Well, we're investing £1.6 billion to ensure that we fill these potholes and we give councils the resources they need to do that.
So when can we expect... I mean, listen, I notice as I drive around the amount of potholes. I mean, it's just a nightmare. When can we expect to feel that there are fewer potholes on our roads?
Well, very soon.
Oh, come on, Emma. Come on, you've got to do better than that.
Well, look, we've only been in power for 7 months and we've had a terrible winter. But, yes, we are giving councils more resource to fill in these potholes so that people aren't affected in the way that the gentleman, I'm sure, has been perhaps as well, because this is really a cost to people's livelihoods. Sometimes it's very unsafe as well. We haven't talked about that element of...
No, listen, you don't have to tell us that, but we all know that.
But a lot of councils are having cuts to their budget. I know my council is having cuts to their budget overall. So there is, in that envelope, when they're dealing with social care and all the other crises, like, actually, there's not a lot of money for potholes.
We are giving them additional funding to fill the potholes.
And is it hypothecated to potholes? So it's not that they can say, we're a bit short of cash, we'll spend it on social care or something else? I'm putting you on the spot here, because this is not something you know about.
Potholes is not my policy.
OK, all right, all right.
Do you know my favourite thing? There's a guy on TikTok who got so cheesed off with having potholes. He goes and plants flowers in them, and then takes pictures of them, and he's made a career out of doing this. But I would say...
Didn't Rod Stewart fill in some potholes himself? Well, listen, there were potholes on the Conservative government as well. So Rishi Sunak said, right, we're going to spend, what was it, some of the money that they saved from HS2 was going to be spent, was 8.3 billion over 11 years to sort out potholes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the great thing about
Did we
this
ever
is
see that?
people care
Any of
so
it?
much about potholes. We've got local elections coming up, so look at what your council does.
No,
and
I'm
make a
asking you,
decision on them.
did we ever see any of that money? I mean, I don't remember potholes getting better.
We
under
had
Conservatives.
sets of funds coming up because it is a trendy thing when elections come up to have pothole funding, as you've seen by Labour when they came in, did a 1.6 billion. I think we did a similar fund as well. It's a commonplace. But more importantly, you've got local elections coming up. So you've got them coming up, I don't know if they're in Wolverhampton, but you've got your chance to look at your councillor, who's the one who gets them fixed, and make sure you support them. I hope it's a Conservative one if they're doing it, but, you know, there are other brands out there.
I just wanted to ask another question about the Employment Rights Bill.
OK, let's not do that, because we're talking about potholes, but thank you. Yes. Who have we got here? Right at the very back, the man with the glasses.
During the last local elections, we had a door-knocking Labour candidate who I said to him, I will vote for you if you fix the pothole at the top of our street. And he was elected. And the very next day, that pothole was fixed. So I suggest people power is the way to get
so that's
this
what you need to be saying on the doorstep. Man in the blue check shirt with the glasses.
Yeah, there's a pothole at the end of my street. It's deeper than the Grand Canyon. They come along and fill it in and patch it up, and then next week it's exactly the same again.
Yeah. And what with this? I can't see. There's another hand up close to you. Yes, there. Yes, I can't see who the hand belongs to. Yes, you. Yes, there you go.
Can the central government do something more with the councils? I cycle, and I notice different counties are cycling seem to deal with their potholes some better than ever. When I cross from Staffordshire into the West Midlands, you know a difference by the amount of potholes.
Right, OK. All right, man here in the pink shirt.
Yeah, what always amazes me is when they do come out to fix potholes, they've clearly got a list of which ones they can do. But the one 4 foot away, they'll leave. So, how they actually manage the works is an issue. Yeah. And as somebody's already alluded to, they fix them, but within a month, 2 months, they're back to where they were before. So is there any better sort of method of repairing them as a longer-term fix?
Woman here.
Is there some kind of a pothole formula that can be developed? Because if there are 6 potholes every 1 mile, how far will £1.6 billion go anyway?
Now, how interesting you mentioned that. How interesting you mentioned that. Because, as I say, I had to gin up on this because I knew we were going to be doing it. So the government announced a new AI tool, I'm telling you, so I expect it's news to you, to predict potholes before they form, allowing roads to be repaired earlier and more cheaply. Surrey County Council are apparently trialling it. Wendy.
Well, as the Scot in the panel here, obviously thankful to Tar McAdam for our roads in the first instance. But I think, we all know the trunk roads are managed on a national basis. I don't drive often in England, but I represent a rural constituency, and potholes are a huge issue. They come up on the door knockings as well. But we've always, as our Liberal Democrat group and Fife Council, we've always negotiated additional money for potholes in the budget because of that. But I think I share the absolute frustration of temporary repairs for potholes. Actually, it's not about potholes, it's about ensuring overall roads maintenance so that the potholes don't appear in the first instance.
Is anyone here an expert in road maintenance or just on the off chance? You never know who we've got in the audience. Right, OK. There's someone right at the back in the middle who had their hands up. Yes?
I'm a motorcyclist.
Oh, hang on. Who's speaking now? Yeah. Oh, you are? OK, we'll hear from you and then the person at the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a motorcyclist, and I've recently relocated from London to Wolverhampton, which is my hometown. I've always been very aware of potholes because it's a big deal when you're a motorcyclist, as I'm sure it's for a cyclist. But I have noticed a very large number of potholes in this region compared to London. So when we talk about funding, can we be sure there's going to be a fair distribution of that funding?
Right. OK. And the right further back, yes.
Why are we even thinking about using AI tools for predicting potholes, and how do we know that will be accurate? Why can't we just focus on maintaining the health of our roads in general?
I have to say, I did think, I don't know if you need to use AI, you could just tell the council. We all see them, don't we? Konstantin, I bet you didn't think you'd be talking about this tonight.
No, I'm glad we're tackling the big subjects. If Vladimir Putin tuned in to find out what his pesky Brits are going on about, he's tuned out by now.
Emma and I, door knocking, it comes up weekly.
I'm actually only joking because I got a hint that this might be coming up. I spoke to everyone I know and everyone said it was bad. And actually, I had some friends visiting from Ukraine who live in the middle of a war zone, and we were driving and they looked around and went, there's quite a lot of potholes here, Konstantin. So it's clearly an issue, and it sounds, based on what we've heard tonight, that the way to solve it is to have another election.
Right, I've got 20 seconds left. Let's have one more. Yes, person here in the front in a white T-shirt. You've got to be brief, 20 seconds.
Yeah, the problem is you've got one person fixing the pothole, another 3 people watching him fixing the pothole, and 2 people sitting in the van watching them all doing X amount of jobs.
They're doing the AI.
I am sure that people who mend the roads would take great exception to that. But anyway, who said we don't tackle the big subjects? OK, we've done potholes at last. Right, that is all for this week. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to all of you coming and taking part in such a lively fashion. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. We're in Reading next week. And remember, we are on iPlayer and also on BBC Sounds. So, from Question Time in Wolverhampton. Until next week, bye-bye.
I mean, the key question is, where do we begin?
Who do you want to go